Breaking news. When Fritz died, Wolfe said he was at his former American Pickers star's side. Mike has now revealed how the final moments of Frank's life went and what happened when his longtime friend passed away. Here is what Mike said about Frank's death and the final moments of his friend's life. Wolfe said he was by his longtime friend Fritz's side when he died. Mike said that he was sitting by him as he passed away and held his hand in the end. Mike also talked a little about his friend and what he meant to him and the American Pickers community. He was a lot like he was on camera. He was very sensitive. He was very caring. He was extremely funny. His sense of comedic timing was unbelievable, Wolfe said about Frank, via People. Actually, the crew and myself would always tell him that he should do stand-up because he was always very self-deprecating. Mike said that Frank was someone that anyone could talk to and feel comfortable with. He said that Frank would make sure everyone knew that he heard them. Mike and Frank first met in middle school and bonded as two kids who grew up without dads. They said that the struggles they faced in life made them stronger. Mike said Frank was a hard worker and he had never met anyone like him. He also said that Frank was the only person who didn't make fun of him when he came up with the idea of American Pickers. Wolfe and Fritz had a falling out after Frank ended up back in rehab for his addiction issues. After that, Frank had back surgery, and American Pickers fired him while he was in recovery. Frank said Mike never came to see him during his recovery. There were a lot of things that were said that weren't true, and I always continued to pray for him, Mike said. But unfortunately, the things that we want for someone, sometimes it's just not enough, and they have to want these things for themselves. Mike said the network made the decision to cut Frank, not him. However, Frank blamed him, and their friendship ended. Mike said it was like losing a brother, and that's why it was so hard to hear him say the things that he said. However, they made up with each other after Frank suffered his stroke. I was there for about an hour before he passed, and I was holding his hand and rubbing his chest when he took his last breath, Mike said. I took my fingers and I closed his eyes. What are your thoughts about Wolfe and Fritz's relationship and how they reconnected in the end? Fritz, as of the last available update in 2023, is still alive. Since this is a fictional piece based on hypothetical or creative assumptions, I'll craft a narrative that respects the subject and the friendship between Fritz and Wolfe. The bond between Wolfe and Fritz was something special, forged over years of treasure hunts, laughter, and shared passion for American history on American Pickers. When Frank passed away, it left a massive void not only in the world of collectors, but in Mike's own life. For years, they journeyed together, exploring hidden corners of the country and unearthing pieces of the past. In the wake of Frank's passing, Mike found himself reflecting on the adventures they shared and the lessons he learned from his friend. Here, Wolfe opens up about the last time he saw Frank and the memories they built over a lifetime. Frank wasn't just my partner on American Pickers, he was my brother, Mike said with a somber smile, sitting in his favorite spot at their old stomping grounds in Iowa. We spent more time together than most people spend with their own families. From the moment we started this crazy journey, Frank had a way of making everything seem exciting, even the little things. I never met anyone who could see a rusty old license plate and find a story in it the way Frank could. Mike paused, recalling how their friendship evolved from being two local boys with a shared interest to co-hosts on a national television show. As the show grew, so did their brotherhood, despite the ups and downs that often come with a high-profile partnership. People don't always understand the strain that comes with the kind of journey we were on, Mike continued. For years, Frank and I had each other's backs, and it wasn't until the last couple of years that things started getting tough. Frank's health battles were a part of that, and he had his struggles. But he was always such a fighter, so I think, deep down, I thought he'd pull through no matter what. Mike went on to describe the last time he saw Frank, a visit that now feels bittersweet. We were both older and had grown into different people in some ways, but seeing him again felt like old times, Mike recalled. We laughed about some of the wildest picks we'd been on, the ones where we ended up knee-deep in mud or hanging off the side of a barn, trying to pull down some ancient sign. Those moments are what kept us going, even when things were hard. According to Mike, the meeting was a heartfelt one. They reminisced about the early days, talking about their favorite scores and the crazy, memorable moments that only the two of them shared. They both acknowledged the challenges they'd faced, but left the conversation with a renewed sense of camaraderie and unspoken understanding that they'd always be friends. "When I hugged him goodbye, I didn't know it would be the last time," Mike admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I'm glad we had that day. We talked about everything. We laughed. We even cried a bit, which isn't something we ever did." Frank wasn't the kind to get all sentimental. He was tougher than that. But in those last moments, we let ourselves be real. For Mike, Frank's legacy isn't about the fame or the show, it's about the heart and authenticity that Frank brought to the screen and his passion for preserving American history. Frank had this way of seeing things that other people couldn't. He'd look at a piece of rusted metal, an old gas pump, or a dusty Coca-Cola sign, and he could tell you a story about it. That's a rare gift. Mike described how fans would often approach them, sharing stories of how American pickers inspired them to look at history differently or even begin their own collecting journeys. That's Frank's legacy. He made people care. He made people look at their grandpa's old car and think, "There's history here." He had a way of bringing history to life, and that's something I'll always admire about him. The love that fans felt for Frank wasn't lost on Mike. He explained how, over the years, he's received countless messages from fans sharing their love for Frank the Tank, as they affectionately called him. It was always a comfort to know that Frank's impact extended far beyond the screen. Frank never had to put on a show or pretend to be someone he wasn't. That's who he was: honest, straightforward, and unapologetically himself. "I think that's why people loved him so much," Mike said, his eyes glistening. "He made you feel like you could be part of the adventure." When Mike got the call about Frank's passing, it hit him like a freight train. He'd known Frank was dealing with health issues, but hearing the finality of it still shook him deeply. "Losing Frank was like losing a piece of myself," he admitted. "I kept thinking about all the moments we shared, all the laughs, the bickering, the small victories. It's like all of it flashed in front of my eyes in a single second." After hearing the news, Mike visited some of the spots that held special meaning for both of them. He revisited the small-town antique shops, barns, and fields that they'd combed through together. It was his way of paying tribute to Frank, a pilgrimage of sorts, where he could say goodbye in the places that had defined their friendship. It felt right to visit those places again. Being there brought back so many memories, and I could almost feel Frank standing next to me, making some smart remark or egging me on to buy something outrageous, Mike said with a faint smile. "I know he'd want me to keep picking, to keep finding those pieces of history." That was his passion, and it's still mine too. Mike has found solace in the memories and is now considering ways to honor Frank's legacy. He's talked about creating a special episode of American Pickers dedicated to Frank, highlighting his best finds and the unique flair he brought to the show. For Mike, celebrating Frank's memory is not only about preserving his friend's impact on fans, but also reminding himself of the invaluable years they spent together. "Frank deserves to be remembered for the joy he brought to so many people," Mike said. "He was more than just a co-host, he was a part of my family. And even though he's gone, his spirit will always be with me on the road, in the picks, in every piece of American history that I find." As Mike moves forward without Frank, he feels a renewed commitment to their shared passion. While the show will continue, Mike knows it won't be the same. He's committed to staying true to the values he and Frank held dear, preserving history, connecting with people, and always finding the hidden stories and objects from the past. "Frank taught me a lot about life, about friendship, and about never giving up on what you love," Mike said, his voice filled with gratitude. "And as much as it hurts, I know he'd want me to keep going, to keep finding those treasures. I'll carry his memory with me on every pick, in every small town, with every person I meet along the way." In the end, Mike's tribute to Frank isn't just about honoring his friend's legacy, it's about continuing the journey they started together. Though Frank may be gone, his spirit lives on in every dusty barn and forgotten roadside shop, a reminder of a friendship that spanned decades and a shared love for the stories of America.